Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lowry, and in today's episode, well, guess what? We're back with more on our Linux command line series. Joining us in the studio, the man, the myth, the legend, you know him as Don Pezet. Don, welcome back, sir. How's it going today?
Great. Now I got this high bar to live up to.
Let's see it. Make the magic happen.
All right. Well, I am glad to be back. You know, in this episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. Each episode, I've kind of picked a single topic to address and shown a series of commands that all related to one topic. And then I kind of got to the bottom of my command barrel and said, here's stuff that's really important that I think people need to know, but it's just not necessarily related. So this is going to be our grab bag episode, or potpourri, potluck, I don't know, whatever, our mixed nuts bag of commands that I think are handy to know to make your command line experience a lot more friendly. So yeah, I don't have some great summary here. We're going to cover a bunch of junk, a bunch of useful technologies right here in this episode.
Well, Don, this is going to be a real fun for me as the host because they don't really connect. They're all very disjointed. So I'm just going to kind of tee you up for each one of our topics that we have, and you'll take it away from there. First one's going to be foreground and background processes, a very important thing, and can really be helpful for us, right?
Absolutely. Yep. So you know, the Linux operating system, or the kernel, is a multitasking operating system at heart. It can run more than one application at the same time. And via the GUI, we do that easy. There's a bunch of windows, right? But you can actually multitask from the command line as well. And it's a far less used technique, but it is actually really useful, especially if you're SSH'd into a system and you've only got one shell, but you want to run more than one program. It can be a little tricky. So there are built-in commands we can use to actually run more than one thing at a time. So let me show you, for example, I'm in my terminal here. And if I run something like the Midnight Commander, right? I run MC, fire up the Midnight Commander, it goes full screen, it takes over my shell, so now my entire session is occupied by this one program.
Blue awesomeness.
It is. I like Midnight Commander. But so I'm in here, I'm working, it's great, there we go, right? But maybe I really quick just want to see what my IP address is. Okay, well, I know that if I were in my regular command prompt, I could run IP-ADDR, right? And there's actually a way to run a command here in Midnight Commander, which I can't remember. But wouldn't it be nice if, just like in a GUI, if I could just minimize this window for a moment, run my other command, and then bring this window back up? But it's not a window. It's a full screen application. It's running and it's taking my session. So what you can do is you can stuff this application in the background by hitting Control-Z. Control-Z, some people call it the sleep combination. I don't know. It's like a sleep number bed. I'll just hit Control-Z, and the application goes in the background. Okay? So it's now hiding in the background for me, and I can recover it whenever I'm ready. But I can drop in here. Now I can do an IP-ADDR. I can see my IP address. And then when I'm ready to pull that application back up, I can. And the way you do that is by knowing the job number. Each application that you run is treated as a job for your session. And it gets stuffed in the background. And if you run the jobs command, you'll see the jobs that you got. Now I've only got one, so I knew it was job number one. But you could have 3 or 4 different programs that you've been launching and using. You know, maybe I launch into Nano, which actually does it. I don't think Nano lets me do the Control-Z combination. But maybe I'm in Vim, and I stuff that one in the background. And you know, any other applications I can think of, even simple applications like FTP, which I don't have installed, applications like that, you can stuff them in the background. And when you run jobs, there they are, right? Now, some applications keep running in the background. Most applications stop. They just freeze, right? What is Midnight Commander going to do when it's sitting there in the background? It's going to do nothing. So it stops. It's still running. It's still consuming memory, but it's not consuming CPU. It's saving resources. Sometimes we do want them to keep running, and I'll show you some tricks with that. But here, it stopped, and I can pull it back up by just doing a % and then the number of the job that I want to recover. So if I want to go back into Midnight Commander, I would type %1, and now I'm back into Midnight Commander. And I hit Control-Z, and I could type %2, and now I'm back into Vim, right? So I'm able to quickly move between these applications without actually closing them. They're still running. I could be in Vim and have not saved my file yet, and just park it in the background with Control-Z, jump over to Midnight Commander, do whatever it is that I need, and then come back again very easily. So I'm multitasking with these applications. Even though I'm just in a single shell, I'm able to do that. Now, I mentioned how they're in the background, but they're stopped, and that's usually a good thing. But maybe I'm doing something like running Apache, right? I want to fire up a web server, but I don't want it to be a daemon that runs every time my computer boots up. I just want to run it right now, right? And so you can run HTTPD-D, and it'll run just one time, right, as opposed to running as a service. But if I run it and I stick it in the background, it's going to stop, and that's not so good, right? So if I want to run it and have it keep running, what I need to do is hit Control-Z to stick it in the background, and then you can type BG. And BG will say, take that background task and let it run in the background. Okay, let it run and keep doing its thing. Now, I did Midnight Commander. Midnight Commander doesn't support running in the background, so it just stopped immediately again. But I can look at my jobs, and there they are. And so you might have one in the background that says running. And I might have that web server that's now running, and it's a temporary thing. It's in the background, and that's that. All right. When you use Control-Z, though, the default is to stop, and you use BG to then stick it back there. You can use FG, which is foreground. I don't normally use this one, but FG will bring the application back into the foreground again and take you right back into it. So there I am. I usually use the % and then a number, because if you have multiple programs you want to pick, and with FG, well, you could do FG followed by a number, but it's just faster to do a %.
Yeah, I typically am only running one thing in the background if I'm doing this, so FG works quickly for me. But if I do have those multiple processes, then yeah, I go % style.
Yep. And there's actually another alias that makes this even easier. If I'm doing something like Apache, and I want to run it in the background, and I'm doing HTTPD-D like that, so I'm going to run it, and I want it to go into the background, but I want it to keep running, I can do that all at once just by running it and typing an ampersand. Ampersand means go ahead and run, and then just get out of my way, right? And you would do this anytime that you called, like maybe you called a GUI utility from the command line, right? If I'm in the command line and I launch gedit, right? That's a graphical editor. So it's going to launch the window. But look at my shell back here. In my shell, it's taken over by gedit, right? It's locked this shell for me. And the application is running, and if I close it, then I get my shell back again. But if I ran gedit followed by an ampersand, that means run the program, stick it in the background, but keep it running. And now it runs, and so there's my gedit. It's working. I can type in it, you know, the Great American Novel or whatever. And back here, I have my shell again. And I can keep working. And if I look at my jobs, there's gedit. And see how gedit shows as running? It's not stopped like the other ones. It's running. It's doing its job, even though it's in the background, right? So using Control-Z will stick it in the background, and it will freeze it. It'll stop it. BG would start it running again if it supports that. Or you can just straight up run it and stick it in the background like this. I could do a %3 and switch over to that one, except it's a graphical utility. So if I do that, it doesn't quite work, and now my shell is taken over, right? And if I do a Control-Z, see how it stopped? And so that's not necessarily a good thing, right? It stopped even though I've got it open back here. And if I try and type, it's actually not responding to me typing. I've frozen it now, which is not so good. And I can use BG. And I don't know if you saw, but all of a sudden my letters appeared as soon as I ran BG to start it back up again. And if I look at the jobs, there it is, and it's running, and it's working. So it was kind of a series of commands there, right? So there was Control-Z to stick something in the background, or the ampersand to just run it in the background from the beginning, and then BG and FG to start something running in the background or bring it to the foreground again. And then there was the % numbers to pick from a job. So that's kind of the little multitasking system that's built into every Linux distro that's out there, and really every Unix and BSD one as well. So a great way to do that all right from the command line.
Don, I like how you framed it as basically the command line version of minimizing and maximizing, just getting things out of our way so we can do other things and have our task, and then when we're ready for it, bring it right back up. Very, very helpful thing. This is something that you're actually probably going to engage in with quite some frequency. So get familiar with those commands so that you can do that whenever you need it. Now, Don, moving on, we're talking about just odds and ends. Another one that you've got put down in our notes here is chaining commands. And this is actually super helpful because I don't want to type in a command, hit enter, type a command, hit enter, or have a command take over my shell. Well, I've got to put that in the background. I just want to put them all together and let them run and be done with it.
Yeah, absolutely. In other episodes, I talk about pipelining commands, where you take the output from one command and you feed it into another command, right? So like if I just run dmessage, and when I run this, if we take a look at my computer, when I run dmessage, it's going to give me a flood of data, right? And so I might pipe the output of one command into the next command. Like I might pipe that into more, and now I get paginated output, right? That's the two commands working together. But sometimes I don't want them to work together. I just want to run two completely different, unrelated commands. I just want to run them all in one line, right? And so you can do that by chaining them. And we chain by using a semicolon. So for example, maybe I want to get information about this system. This is the first time I've logged into the laptop. I want to know about it. So I want to run uname-a to be able to find what kernel it's running. And then I want to run hostname to find out what its hostname is, right? Or maybe hostname CTL to get even better information, right? And then I want to run IP-ADDR to find out what IP address it is, right? Each of these are valid commands that I could run by themselves, but I'm separating them with semicolons. And the semicolons are telling the command line, don't run these together, run them one at a time. They're independent commands. They're independent from each other. And when I run that, I get my output. And right here in the first line, that is uname-a's output. And then right after that, I get hostname CTL's output. And right after that, I get IP-ADDR's output. It ran each command in the order that I typed them. That's command chaining. And so if you've got two things that you know you're going to do, for example, maybe I just installed Apache, and I know that I want to enable the daemon so that it'll start at boot time, and I want to start the daemon so it'll start right now. You could say systemctl enable HTTPD, and then a semicolon systemctl start HTTPD. That will tell it start up when the system boots and start it right now, right? Now there's other shortcuts that make that easier, but this is a way that I would do. Just run the two commands. I know I'm going to run them anyway, but here I can put them on one command. Really handy when you're scripting and automating and shrink the size of your script files a good bit by chaining commands together like this.
Now, Donna, a lot of times when I'm typing commands, and if anybody out there has worked in Linux in any stretch of the imagination for any length of time, you'll notice a lot of commands tend to take up a lot of space, and they'll wrap around down to below. And if you're chaining commands together, God help you, right? Because it just gets a little too difficult to read. It's almost obfuscated to our human acumen, right, to see it and go, what is this? Is there a way that we can break that up to see those easier?
Yeah, absolutely. So, take a command like user add, right? I want to add a new user to my system. And so when I start to run this, I need to specify a lot of data, like where's their home directory. So I'm going to create a user called John Doe, right? So I'll say -d/home/jdoe, right? That's going to be where their home directory is. And then I might specify when their account expires. So I would say that it's going to be 01/01/2018, right? So it's going to expire on January 1st. And I keep going on. I want to put them in a group. I'll call the group JDoe. I might have some secondary groups like ADM or wheel, whatever. I can't spell. Whatever it is that I want to stick them in. So I provide those. And then I keep going, right? Maybe I want to do a password. So I'll provide the password. I'll do password 123 because I'm all about security. And then I'll do maybe what shell they're going to use. They're going to use /bin/zsh. And then maybe I'll do a user ID. I'll hard set that, 1001. And a username. They probably need that, so I'll throw that here on the end. This command got so long that it's wrapped around my screen. Okay, this is the right command. This is it. But it's wrapped around the screen, and it's getting kind of hard to deal with, right? So when you're dealing with a large command like this, it can actually be a lot easier to break it up into multiple lines. And so what you can do is anytime you want to break to another line, you just add a backslash like this. And that tells the shell, hey, I'm going to move on to this next line. Normally when you press enter, it runs a command. But when I press enter this time, see what it did? I'm still in the first prompt. I'm not in a new prompt. I'm still continuing the command that I just ran. And I like to do this with each command line argument. So I can say -d, this is going to be the home directory, right? So that'll be /home/jdoe. And then I'll do another backslash. And now I can do the next argument. The next argument was -e, when's it going to expire? And so I'll put in the expiration date and another backslash, right? And then we'll just kind of keep running with that -g for JDoe. That was the group that I wanted him to be in. And I won't do them all, but you guys see where I kind of break them up on a line. This makes it a little more manageable, a little easier to see on the screen. In a script, you wouldn't care how long the command was. But when you're doing it by hand, sometimes in a terminal, you just don't have a lot of screen real estate. This makes life a lot easier. And I can do that, and when I get to a line and I don't put a backslash, that's when it's going to step in and it's actually going to run the command. And so when I do that one, now it knows, oh, time to run the command, okay? And it tried to run the jdo command, and when it did, it's all permission denied, right? Because I didn't sudo it, I didn't run it as administrator. But if I hit my up arrow to bring up my history, look at that. It's all one line, right? It processes it as one line. So this is simply a visual change. By doing those backslashes like that, it's a visual thing to help us as humans to get that data entry put in there and get it right and make it look nice. The computer, it's going to string it all together in one line and then run it. So that's basically a multi-line command.
Don, I love that to death. That is great. And I really like the way that you do it with every option has its own line. It really makes it easy to follow and read what exactly you're trying to do. And then if you make any mistakes, you just look back at your output. Now, we talk about that. You said this, if I go back to my history, that history is it seems like a mundane thing, but it's actually very important and very helpful. And there's a lot of powerful ways in which we can use our history, correct?
Oh, yeah. We haven't really talked about history in all these episodes, so let's talk about it now. When you type a command, the shell remembers it. It remembers your command. It maintains a history of all the commands that you've typed. And you can just easily use your keyboard to view that history. You can press up, the up arrow, and you're scrolling backwards through all the commands that you've run. Or you can press down, and now you're scrolling forward. So you can scroll back and forth through all the commands you've run that session, right? It's a nice way. If you maybe had a little typo, you can just hit that up arrow, and then you can go and fix the typo, and then you're back in business. Maybe you're in a shell that doesn't support arrow keys, right? There's some that don't, especially when you're remoting into a terminal. So there's some keyboard shortcuts for this as well. You can do Control-P and Control-N. Control-P for the previous command, Control-N for the next command. So previous and next kind of makes sense, which is odd. So the Control-P and Control-N to be able to scroll back and forth between those and be able to see everything that you've run before. But I'll tell you, one of the most handy ways to do this is to actually just type history. That's the history command, and it will show you all of the commands that you've typed. And so we can see from the beginning of the episode where I started running Midnight Commander and Nano and all those and putting them in the background, I can see where I did that. And then we can see where I started running uname and chaining commands and then the multi-line command, which doesn't show as multi-line because the system strung it all together. But I can see everything that I typed right there to be able to look at it and recall it and get that information. So the history command is a great way to view that. But we can go even further with it, right? With the history command, I'm not just limited to being able to scroll up and scroll down like that. If I want to try and run a command again, like maybe I want to try and add jdo again, all right? What you can do from your command line is you can type an exclamation point, and the exclamation point lets the system know that you want to work with the history command, all right? And then you can type the number of a previous command. So that user add command for me was command number 28. So if I do an exclamation point and then type 28, it's going to rerun that line, and it shows me the line. It shows me the command that it ran, and then I got permission denied again because I'm not an administrator. But it ran it. So I can easily do that with any of them. If I want to view my jobs, that was number 13, right? So I can say exclamation point 13, and that lists my jobs. Or whatever else it is that I want to do. I want to launch gedit again. I can do exclamation point 16, and there it goes, launching gedit just like we did before. So being able to view that history and recall those commands is pretty nice. It saves you a lot of typing, and it does give you a chance to go in there and fix typos that you might have had or whatever.
Yeah, Don, speaking of saving typing, here's one of my, I do this all the time, and I always want to flog myself for doing it because I can't believe I never remember to do this. When I need to run elevated privileges, I'll type in these long commands for whatever it is I'm doing, and I forgot to put sudo, right? Just forgot. I hit enter, and now I have to type it in again. Or I've got to up to my last history and then move over. I can use some command shortcuts if I know them, but probably just using arrow to arrow over this massive command so I can type sudo in again. There's a neat little shortcut built in, and it saves my bacon all the time. I'll let you hammer it home.
Sure. So let's say I had a command that I wanted to run as an administrator, and I didn't, right? So maybe I'll just run whoami to illustrate the point. And so when I run it, it runs as me, right? And, oh, hang on, I got a job ending there. There we go. So I run whoami, and it shows it's running as deep as that. I'm like, oh, shoot, I meant to run that as an administrator, right? Well, I could press the up arrow, or we'll take that user add, because that one's actually long, right? So I run and I get an error, right? I could press the up arrow and then hold the left arrow to scroll back, right? Or maybe I'm a keyboard junkie, so I do Control P to get the previous command, and then you've got Control A to jump to the beginning. That's nice if I remember it, and I can say sudo, right? But what's even better is in the history world, if you do exclamation point, that reruns your previous command. So I had user add as my previous command, so if I do exclamation point, it reruns it. Even better though, I could type sudo exclamation. Now, it's going to rerun that same command, but it's going to run it as root. So for example, if I do who am I, that ran as dpossess. But if I do sudo exclamation, it's going to rerun who am I, and it runs it as root. So real quick way, if you, no matter how long your command was, it could wrap around the screen 5 times, and you just do sudo bang bang, and then there we go, and it runs with those elevated privileges. So really handy way to do that in a neat way. You can also use this if you like forget an argument, like I want to run uname-a. I want to see what kernel I'm running, and instead I just run uname. Whoops, I forgot the -a, so I need to add -a to it. And so if I want to do that, I could just say exclamation point, -a. So run the same command I just ran, but add a -a to the end, and now I get the output that I want. So quick, easy way to interact with that. And you can do that with any of the history commands. So if I'm looking at my history and I see where I ran dmessage, right, was number 25, right? So if I were to call up number 25 like this, there's dmessage, right? But I really wanted to pipe that into less. Well, I could just say exclamation point 25 and then pipe that into less. And so now I'm going to rerun that same command. And that's useful if you run one and you don't realize it's going to be a flood of information. You can just say, oh, let me quit that, and then I'll rerun it like that, and then pipe that into less or wherever it is that you want it to go. Quick way to easily redo that. So really neat stuff there when it comes to manipulating your history. Now,
go ahead.
Let me just add one quick thing about this. History is tied to your session. And so if I close my session, this history goes away. When I log in again, I get an all-new session, which means an all-new history. Some distros have started writing your history to a file, right? If you look in your home directory, if you do like an ls-la, and look, you may have a file in there called .bash_history. There's mine right there, okay? And as you run your history commands, or as you run your commands, when you log out, a lot of operating systems will start to write to that file. So when you log in the next time, your history is still there. That's kind of nice, okay? So some of them don't do it automatically, though. And you can make the system do it by saying history -w. -w is for write. I want to write my history to a file. And that's going to make sure that it gets committed so that the next time I log in, the very first command I could run is history, and all of my previous commands would pop up and show up there. So history -w, really handy for that.
All right, Don. Well, that moves us into the last thing that we have for the show. Very interesting. I think this is one of the crowning jewels of working in the Linux system, and it's because Linux is meant to be very configurable, right? It's meant to be the way you like it. And a lot of times, and you've talked about this as well, things like ls command, I want to add certain options, or I always add those options. And Linux, they give us the ability to make it to where it always runs that option through a little command that they give us, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, we have aliases where you can create your own custom name for any command, right? I used to do this for the ones that I would always type wrong. There were some that I would just always spell them wrong. So, you know, in the Unix world, it's an old command now, but you used to have ifconfig, which is still there, ifconfig. If you work in the Windows world, the command is ipconfig. And I would move between Windows and Linux so much that sometimes I would screw up. So I started creating an alias so that anytime I ran ipconfig, it would just call ifconfig and save me the screw up. It doesn't matter now because the ifconfig is going away. But you can create aliases to map any name to any command. And it's pretty handy. What you do is you just type alias and then the command that you want to overwrite. Okay. So for example, I might want to overwrite ipconfig, right? So that's the command that I keep running. I want it to run as ifconfig. And so then you can say equals and a single tick for a quote mark and whatever command you want it to actually run. So I want it to run ifconfig instead, right? So now when I screw up and type the wrong thing, it's going to make me type the right thing. Now before I do that, let me just clear that out. I'm going to run ipconfig. command not found, right? It doesn't exist in Linux. Then I'm going to run alias ipconfig equals ifconfig. And now when I run ipconfig, it says, oh, you meant to run ifconfig, and it runs it. That's one example of using an alias. Over the years, you learn your commands, you stop screwing up, so you don't need it that way. But where I use it are command line arguments, right? Like I rarely want just ls. I almost always want ls-lah, right? I want the long output, I want to show all files, even hidden files, and I want it to be human readable file sizes. That's what I want, LAH, right? So I have to type that every time, and that's annoying, right? I could just say alias ls equals, and then I'll do a single tick and tell it that I actually mean that to be ls-lah, right? And when I do that, now whenever I run ls, it actually runs it the way that I wanted it to, and it lays it out here, and I see all the files and information laid out nice and neat. And I might even want to go a little bit further and add like a -- color equals auto, because I lost my coloring in that one. And so I can add that to it, or whatever else it is that I need to make that alias work the way that I want. And now when I look at it, I get a long output, and it's nice and colorized, and all I had to run was ls. Right? Now, quick word of caution about this. Aliases are a temporary thing, so the moment I log out, the aliases go away. We're going to do another episode on environment variables and how we can make these things persist between sessions. But just using the alias command like this is temporary. So you really want to put it into a login script so that every time you log in, the aliases are recreated. And you already have some of those, whether you know it or not. If you just run the alias command, it'll show you any aliases you've already got. And you'll see the ones that I made. There's the alias for ipconfig right there. But there's other aliases like egrep and fgrep. I didn't make those, but the system has them anyway. They've been created. And that's because somebody at Red Hat, in my case, decided to go ahead and put those there. If you're running Ubuntu, you may see different ones. If you're running Debian, you'll see different ones, just based on whatever it is that was set up for your system.
Well, Don, you named this other useful commands, and is definitely what it is. There's a lot of great useful commands that are inside of our Linux systems. They're going to help us navigate, help us get around the place a whole lot easier, empower us to use the system in a better way that's more convenient, more efficient. So we just have to be aware of those things that are in there. And Don, you did a fantastic job of showing us today some of those commands that are lurking around inside of our Linux box. Don, any parting words before we close the show today?
Well, I tried to cover a lot of stuff that I use, things that make my life a little better. Be careful as you start to find tools and utilities that you really enjoy. I always try and stick with ones that are standard, that are core utilities, ones that I know are going to be there no matter what system I get on. When you start creating a bunch of aliases, what happens when you go to a system that doesn't have those aliases? Now that's gone, and you can have a really hard time. So I try not to rely on them too much, or if you do rely on them a lot, start carrying a thumb drive with a little script file that creates those aliases real quick, or something of that nature. But you don't want to lean on them too much. But there are a ton of built-in utilities that really can help you and make that command line environment a lot more friendly to use. So just explore around, mess around with them. You'll find that it's actually pretty neat what you can do in there.
Words of wisdom from Don Pezet. My parting words would be check the man files for each one of these commands. They have a lot of great information inside of them. It might do something you ever even realized it could do and make your life a whole lot easier. I know I found that to be true for myself. Don, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and effort as always. And as always, we appreciate you good folks out there for watching. But looking at the clock, we have exhausted the time for yet another great show. Thanks for joining us. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Don Pezet.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.